Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today I'm going to be bringing you my review for Remnant 2. Now, this is actually quite a tough review for me to make for two reasons. Number one, whenever I think about Remnant 2, I just want to jump into the game and actually play it because I've been having an absolute blast over the last couple of weeks just going completely ham on this game. I'm currently somewhere north of 70 hours of gameplay, so pretty much whenever I sit down, I'm like, oh, I should record some B-roll, and then I just play the game, not actually record any usable footage because I end up solving a bunch of puzzles, which I would consider to be spoilers when it comes to actually put into this review, which makes it even hard for me to just get footage that I'll be like, oh, I'm happy with this footage being in this video because this is actually not going to spoil anything for anyone, but at the same time, that footage is not going to show you why the game is so magical and why I like it so goddamn much. And the other reason is because despite the fact that I'm completely enamored with it and I just love playing it and I can't get myself away from it, it also has a couple of problems. So I figured that what I would do is right at the beginning of the video, I could give you all of the things that I consider to be bad when it comes to Remnant 2, and then we can spend the rest of the video talking about why this game is absolutely amazing and it is something that you should definitely play, even if not now, at some point in your life, because this is one of those games that kind of takes us back to the basics. You know how nowadays there are a lot of video games that concerns themselves with things like, oh, we gotta make sure that our players remain engaged, we gotta make sure to give them lots of things to do, even if those things are completely and utterly meaningless. Like, there's a lot of games, and I know that there's recent examples that you guys can bring up, but I'm not bringing any specific recent example up. I'm just saying in general. Like, Mutators even made a video recently where he's just like, oh my god, there's all these friggin' game passes across all these games that I'm trying to play. I can't do anything. And Remnant 2 is one of those games that just brings you back down to the basics, and the developers just go, hey, here's a really good game. There's a lot of replayability on it. You can play our game for as little or as much as you want and have a fantastic time, so go ahead and enjoy it. And at this point of the video, you're probably wondering, but Rurikhan, what the hell is this game? You haven't even told us what Remnant 2 is about. And Remnant 2, I feel like one of the best ways to describe it, at least for my audience, it's kind of like Dark Souls with guns. Now, I understand that that is extremely reductive, and there's been attempts in the past of, tackling this type of formula, but Remnant is one of the few games that actually nails it in a way that continuously surprises me despite the fact that I've already finished the game, that I'm going through getting side content and all that stuff, and I'm still brutally immersed in it in a way that I just want to jump back in, like I'm addicted to it, okay? So, let's start, like I said, by talking about all the things that I think are bad about it. And the first thing that I gotta say is, for as much as I love Remnant 2, I do believe that this game came out significantly undercooked, and that is obviously going to be a problem. Namely, and mostly, the undercooking is on a technical aspect. So what does that mean? It means that some players on PC are reporting some serious issues on it. You might have seen the recent conscast that I did with Fightin' Cowboy, where he can barely run the game. He's jumping through all of these hoops, running the game in like compatibility mode for Windows 8. I've never even installed Windows 8 on my machine. I didn't even know that such a thing existed, I feel like. Wasn't that like for mobile computers or something, like, the ones that are halfway between a tablet and a laptop? Whatever. Besides the point. So there are some technical issues, but the thing is, they're inconsistent. So where you have a lot of players that are having a flawless experience, no problem, then you have a whole lot of other players that can barely run the game. So there's some problems there. There's also been occasional performance issues on console. It's not nearly as bad as the problems that some people are experiencing on PC, but there are some situations on console where stuff does get kind of wonky. I believe that at this point, a lot of that has been improved, though, because I remember the first time that I fought the final boss of the game, and I'm not going to get into spoilers, but the final boss of the game, suffice to say, it's got a lot of special effects and stuff going on. And yeah, the performance in that fight was not fantastic. But actually, the last time that I fought him and I killed him was not nearly as bad as the first time. So they're kind of improving it. But basically, you know, your mileage is going to vary in terms of performance, which kind of sucks because this is one of those games that I really want to just tell people, look, just go out and buy it right now. I really want to say that. But there are technical issues that need to be addressed, and hopefully the team can work on fixing those as fast as possible so that I can make another video after my review and just go, guys, remember the thing that I said at the start of my review? Forget all that, go buy the game right now. That is actually what I want to do, because I really want to support these types of games because I feel like they are getting so rare nowadays. And some of you might be wondering, okay, Rurikhan, but you know, 2023 has been an amazing year with a lot of really great games. And I would never really think that Remnant 2 would be a game that would be challenging Tears of the Kingdom and Final Fantasy 16 as games of the year for me. But here we are. It's like, I'm not joking. It really is that good. It's just so refreshing, the stuff that they do. And, you know, we'll get to that. I just want to bring up a couple of more issues. Like I said, so we got some technical problems in terms of performance and all of that stuff. On the PC side of things, on PS5, it's not nearly as bad, but it's still there, particularly when you're playing in multiplayer. And multiplayer stuff sometimes gets a little bit too busy on the screen, and you can have a couple of problems, sometimes also delays, because some of the weapons fire actual projectiles that are coded into the game, which makes it hard. Like, for instance, if I'm playing with someone from the US, you get some latency, and them landing projectiles becomes significantly harder. And in case people are going to say, oh, come on, when are you going to be playing with people from the US? Watch my streams. Apparently, I do it almost every day, as it turns out. So, yes. But anyway, so we have that. Another thing that happened was during the launch week, multiplayer was problematic. I've heard that there were problems on PC as well, even though I did not play it on PC. I played it on PlayStation 5. But again, I heard from Cowboy that, like, you know, his friends list would not populate. In the case of the PlayStation 5, we didn't even have a friends list to work with. And even today, if you go to the friends list that's on Remnant, like, it will just show your entire friends list as being online for some reason. But it works now. But it wasn't working, like, on release. So it's just another thing. There were some multiplayer hiccups here and there. But, you know, technically, we have some issues, right? And then you have the game comes out in 3 different editions. So you have your standard edition, your deluxe edition, and your ultimate edition. And the ultimate edition also came with a 3-day head start, which, you know, for me as a content creator, that's great, because I just buy the most expensive edition, I stream it, and I get into the game earlier than anybody else. But for everybody else, kind of sucks, because if you want to play if you want to buy the more reasonably priced versions of the game, then you're stuck waiting for 3 days, and I know that sucks. So that's also something that I want to talk about. And then the deluxe editions also come with a couple of armor sets, which do affect gameplay, even though it's not really a big deal. You can get those armor sets later in the game. They also come with a couple of items, and some of you might be wondering, oh my god, there's like an XP boosting item. It's not, that stuff is not a big deal at all. It's like, yeah, sure, it'll give people a tiny little edge at the starting mark, but it's not really a big deal, and all that stuff is available by just playing the game. So, you know, the whole multiple access, multiple versions of the game didn't really bother me that much. It was mostly the technical issues that kind of when I give my recommendation, I have to be like, I highly recommend this game. This game's amazing. You should play it, but be aware some people are experiencing technical issues, and, you know, hopefully the team will be able to fix that over the coming weeks. But now, let's get into the good stuff. Usually I go through these videos by first talking about visuals and sound and all of that stuff. So we'll start by visuals. The visuals look really good. It's not like mind-blowing quadruple A visuals, but overall they convey the feel of the world, and I think the game looks really nice. I think the animations also look really good. In terms of sound, the sound is pretty good all around. There is a technical sound issue that happens to me, and I know that this doesn't happen to everyone. Again, it's so frustrating. See, this is why it's so hard to make this review. It's like, I love this game. I want you to play this game. But there's just so many weird things that happen to me. There's like this audio glitch that happens on the final world where it's downright migraine inducing. I don't know if that is a design choice. I don't know if that is like a glitch, but there's like this looping sound that is just like boring a whole. I had to for the sanity of my stream, I felt the need to like lower the volume of the game while I was going through the last level to make sure that people wouldn't get like headaches or anything like that, and for my own sanity too. But other than that, overall, sound is excellent. No real complaints. The music is really good as well. The voice acting is excellent. You know, everything is freaking fantastic there. I feel like the actors did a pretty good job on the amount of cutscenes that we had, which there's not that many cutscenes in the game, but on the few times that you do get cutscenes, the voice acting is really well done. And whenever you are having dialogue with a character, the voice acting there also has been solid throughout the whole experience. So I don't really have a whole lot of complaints when it comes to that. Now, in terms of story, I found the story of the game to be good. It is delivered in a way that it is kind of mysterious, and it expects you to read some of the books that you encounter throughout the game, which I know that a lot of people are not going to go through the trouble of doing all of that stuff. You don't really need to read the books to really get the crux of the story itself, but there are some really neat stories in some of those books. I read some of them. I don't think I've read all of them because the game is procedurally generated. We'll talk more about that a little bit further in the video, but I greatly enjoyed the stories that I did read, and I would recommend people, like, you know, if you're playing co-op, it's rough to kind of like read books while you're hanging out with your friends and all that stuff. But if you are playing solo, then I would definitely recommend, you know, read a couple of the books that are in game. These are not like full-fledged books, right? You're talking like maybe 1 page worth of text. It's not a big deal, and you get some additional context into the world around you, and sometimes just stories, you know, of folklore and stuff like that about the different races that you encounter as you play through Remnant 2. But the story itself, I greatly enjoyed it. And this, by the way, is something that I wasn't even aware. There's another game called Chronos, which is a game that I've been interested in. I never got around to actually playing it, but I've been very interested in jumping into it over the years when it was initially announced, because it has like this, and I know I'm talking about another game, but it has like this mechanic where your character dies and then he ages like 1 year and whatnot. That game is actually a part of this trilogy of Remnant, because I played the original Remnant back in the day, loved it, did have some performance complaints back with the final DLC and whatnot. You might have seen that video on the channel. But I loved my original playthrough of Remnant. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a great game, which is one of the reasons why I jumped into Remnant 2. And I wasn't aware that like Chronos was also a part of that. So not theoretic, but like the actual timeline goes, Chronos before the Ashes, Remnant from the Ashes, and then Remnant 2, which I wasn't even aware that Chronos was part of the same franchise. I'm gonna buy that game eventually and just play that one as well. We'll see if I end up streaming that one on the channel or not. But anyways, the story overall is all about like this entity that is invading several worlds in the universe, and this entity is called the Root, which is the same thing that was happening in the original Remnant. Albeit in the original Remnant, you deal with that in a way that kind of like pushes them back for a while, then they come back in Remnant 2, and you are tasked with dealing with the situation. In order to do this, you're going to go to these different worlds, and in these different worlds, you're going to engage with the Root in different ways because they are infecting those worlds as well, and sometimes you're also dealing with the politics of what that particular race that lives in that world is going through, and that makes for interesting storytelling opportunities. And the cool thing is that the story itself, I was going to say change, but it's not really changing. It's like you can experience the story in different ways because of the nature of the way that they've done the procedural generation of the game, in which it is going to require multiple playthroughs if you want to experience the entirety of the story. And you might be saying like, oh, so does that mean I have to play through the game a bunch of times just to get the story? No, you get the crux of the story in your first playthrough. As a matter of fact, you could argue that like, oh, you do your first playthrough and that is your first story. So the game kind of connects these different stories and weaves them together in a way that makes sense. So your first playthrough, you do one story. Your second playthrough, you're probably going to do a different story depending on the choices that you make along the way, because there are choices that you get to make as you play through Remnant 2. And, you know, depending on those choices, you're going to have different outcomes to the stories of the worlds that you are passing through. So you know, I think the story is overall good, and not just that, but there are multiple mini stories weaved into the game, which are also procedurally generated, which means if you want to really experience everything in the game, it is going to take a lot of playthroughs to actually, you know, get through everything. And the cool thing is, you might be thinking, oh, that's a lot of playthroughs of me repeating the same thing over and over again. It's like, no, no. Because the way in which they do procedural generation is actually really good. And we'll talk more about that. But in terms of story, it's pretty good. It's not like the best story ever, but it is a really good story, and it keeps you engaged as you are going through the game. Now let's jump into the most important part of the review. That is the gameplay. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the one of the most apt descriptions to just kind of like formulate an image in your mind when it comes to this game is this is Dark Souls with guns. So this means that this is going to be a third-person shooter with a little bit of melee. Now, the really cool thing about this third-person shooter is that they actually stuffed it to the brim with loot. There is extremely interesting loot in this game, whether you are looting new armor sets, even though armor sets don't really do much. They just kind of like mess with your resistances and how much armor you get and how much weight you have, and that is going to determine how fast you can roll, what your stamina penalty is going to be, how nimble you're going to be. So it's the same idea that you usually get in a Souls game, where the heavier the armor you equip, then the slower you're going to be, unless you equip, you know, stuff to compensate for that. Like there are going to be rings as well as amulets that are going to give you stats that will help you with equipping heavier armor if that is something that you want to do. You want to be a big beefy boy with a shotgun, you can do that. You want to be a nimble dude with a bow, you can do that. There's tremendous amounts of just diversity when it comes to the builds that you can play when you're playing Remnant 2, which is really, really good. I can imagine that there's probably a lot of content creators out there making like a zillion builds. Now me, I'm still playing through the game. I didn't really get early access to it or anything like that. So I'm still playing through the game, still learning a lot of stuff, still unlocking a lot of the items, and I've mostly been playing for fun than necessarily to make content. Yeah, I've been streaming a ton of it, but I've also been playing a ton of it off stream. So it's been an absolute blast there. Now, but yeah, this is fundamentally a third-person shooter. It does have melee. You can kind of like focus on playing melee. The problem with focusing too much on melee is that there's just going to be certain boss fights that you can't do with melee. I mean, I guess if you find the right throwing weapon, you can probably do it, but it'll be challenging because throwing a weapon consumes a lot of stamina, and, you know, just trying to continuously chuck weapons at a boss is not going to be the best way of going about it, and probably not going to be the most satisfying way of going about it unless you are doing like a challenge playthrough or something of that nature. But, you know, it is an option that is there. There's basically a lot of versatility with that type of stuff. So now, what determines how you actually play the game? It is a system that they are calling Archetypes. Now, Archetypes basically is a class. An archetype is like a class. You get to choose, do you want to be, I mean, what are some of the base stats? You want to be a handler, which is a character that has a dog and synergizes with the dog. And that it's my main character. That's why it was the first one that came to mind. You can choose to be a hunter, which is kind of like, as the name implies, it's kind of like a sharpshooter type class. You can choose to be a medic, which is very good if you're playing co-op, because the game does support co-op up to 3 players if that's something that you're interested in. And the medic is going to be, you know, a little bit tankier because he can heal himself and do all that stuff. You can play a challenger, which is like the most appropriate character for melee because he can equip big, heavy armor. And he has like special abilities and stuff like that that allow him to keep that armor equipped. So you have this archetype system where you choose the class that you want to play. But choosing the class that you're going to be playing does not lock you into a class. So as you play through the game, you're going to be able to unlock more archetypes. And as you unlock more archetypes, you can basically swap classes whenever you want. Each class can be leveled up to level 10 and currently no further. And as you level up, obviously the class becomes stronger. But the really cool thing about the archetype system is that you can have 2 of them. As you level up through the game, I think it's something about a number of points that you get into traits. And at a certain number of trait points, you can basically get a second class. And when you equip the second class, the experience gets divided between the 2 classes that you now have. And eventually you level both of them up to level 10, and then you're like maxed out, and then you can swap to another class if you want to level a different class. But the idea is that you get to combine the best of both worlds. So say, for instance, you want to be a tanky dude with a dog, you can be a handler slash challenger, or a challenger slash handler, because that is different. Your primary archetype is going to have an additional thing that kind of defines your playstyle. You can be a hunter gunslinger, and I don't want to talk too much about the secret classes because the game has hidden classes into the game, which, you know, require to explore and stuff, and I don't really want to go into spoilers, but there's a class, for instance, which you will probably be seeing in this video, which is the engineer. He drops down turrets and stuff like that. So as you get these different hidden classes, you get to equip them and then also like mix and match between them to formulate your own ideal class for whatever you want. Now, each of the class is going to have a prime perk, a trait, 3 abilities, and 4 passives. And they're like, what? So let's start by talking about the prime perk. The prime perk is one of the things that kind of defines what that class is all about. And the prime perk is only available to the class that you equip as your main class. So the main class kind of defines your playstyle in that way. Now, keep in mind, you can swap it around, change it, and, you know, change main classes, change secondary classes. Even in between encounters, there's no, there's no currency that you need to pay. It's literally just an item, and you equip the item, and now you're this class, and then you equip the item on the other side, and you're this class secondary, or you swap them around, do whatever you want. So there's no limits to equipping classes. There is, however, a system where you put in these traits, which are passive benefits that you get from leveling up and stuff like that. And whenever you equip a trait, basically that is kind of like set in stone. And it's easy to respec. It's a little bit costly early in the game, but later in the game you can make a ton of money and you can just respec willy-nilly kind of if you want to. But, you are indeed investing some points into some things. And here's a really cool thing about their traits system before I go any further. A really cool thing about their trait system is that they didn't put in damage traits. Because whenever you put damage passive damage modifiers in an RPG, you know that that's exactly where everybody's going to put points into. You know, it's like, 5% crit, nothing can compete with getting 5% crit. Like you can literally have a trait that would say you become invincible and players will still put points into 5% crit. That's just the nature of playing games nowadays. But the developers anticipated that and they were like, well, there's a bunch of utility traits, there's a bunch of defensive traits, there's a bunch of, different stuff that you can do with traits. There's no offensive traits. So the offensive is going to come from like gear and, weapons and stuff like that, which I think is good because it makes builds a little bit more diverse because not everybody's going to be going for the same stuff depending on the archetypes that they have equipped. But anyways, the prime perk is one of the things that defines your main archetype. So for instance, if you're playing a handler, the prime perk of the handler is that you can resurrect allies faster, you can resurrect the dog faster, and the dog can resurrect your allies. So that's kind of like what defines it. So if you put a handler as your secondary archetype, he can't do those things. And then, different classes are going to have different things. If you play the engineer, for instance, and I talk about a lot about handler engineer because those are the 2 classes that I like the most. If you play the engineer, the prime perk is going to increase the number of ammunition that your turrets are going to have and stuff like that, and you can overload your turrets to fire faster. So the prime perk is something that you only get if it's your primary class, and it kind of like increases the core aspects of that class. So you have a prime perk, then you have a trait. Now the way the trait works is each class has a trait associated with it, and you need to level that up to level 10. Once you do that, that trait becomes unlocked, and you can just level it up as a regular trait. So for instance, if you level up the handler, you up to level 10, then you get a trait that reduces friendly fire damage, which I know for a lot of you guys are thinking like, I don't want that. It's like, but me, I like using explosives and I like playing in co-op, so actually it's a really good trait. But yeah, you level it up to level 10 and then it becomes unlocked. In the case of, I think, the Challenger, I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on it, but I think that the Challenger's trait is reduces armor encumbrance. So if you want to equip heavy armor like a big beefy boy, you'll want to level up the Challenger to maximum, and then you get his trait, and then you can equip heavier armor, even if you roll another class. So there's an incentive there for you to level up every single archetype if you want to really min-max the crap out of the game. So there's a lot of content there for you to do if that's something that you're interested in. Then you also have abilities. Each class is going to have 3 abilities that you can choose from, which become available at different points. So a class that's at level 0, they have 1 ability. When you are at level 5, you get your second ability, and you have to choose. You either use the first ability or use the second one. It's not like the second ability is better. It's just an alternate ability that you get for that class. Once you get level 10, you get the third ability. So to give you an idea, in the case of the engineer, you get 3 different turrets. So you get like a Gatling gun type turret, you get a flamethrower turret, and then you get like this AoE shockwave type of turret when it comes to the engineer. When it comes to the handler, you can tell your dog to be either a guard dog, which acts as a tank. You can tell your dog to be a support dog, which gives you regen, or you can be an attack dog, which increases your damage. So there's all of these different things, and different classes will have different skills that you can do, but you can only ever have 1 skill active at any given time for each of the classes. So you have 2 skills, 1 for each class. In my case, usually it'll be the handler. I can use my dog to regen, and then I can lay down a turret as the engineer as a second one. But as you can imagine, with us having 11 total archetypes in the game, there are going to be a ton of different combinations that you can do. I believe that Tragic, who is one of the developers in the game, has mentioned there are over 100 possible combinations that you can do in order to create a unique class that you enjoy playing. And most classes appear to be viable, even in the harder difficulties. Like, I believe I was playing Handler Engineer in Apocalypse, and it was working okay. It's not like the most efficient thing possible, but I like playing it, and it was working fine. So, you know, whatever. And then you have your 4 passive effects, which increase in potency as you level up. These are just passive effects for each of the classes. And, you know, combining those passive effects coupled together with the different abilities, coupled together with the traits and the prime perks and all of that, is going to give you ridiculous amounts of diversity in terms of the type of builds that you can actually go around and do. And the fact that you can just freely swap between them is very freeing, and it's, you know, it's very non-committal. Like, oh, I'm tired of this class, I want to play something else. You just play something else in the same character. You don't have to make a second character, all of that stuff. And this is just, you know, we've just talked about the archetype system. We haven't even talked about the guns. So you guys might be wondering, okay, Rurikhan, how interesting are the guns? They're friggin' awesome. Now, there's going to be a default version of every gun when you start the game, so that you can just go to a vendor and buy a different gun if you want to. So say your class starts with a revolver and a shotgun, but you don't like that. Well, you can go to this vendor and you can just get like an assault rifle or something like that. And the base weapons are viable, but boss weapons and some of the weapons that you'll find throughout the game are going to be much more interesting. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I don't want to spoil too much because, you know, there's always a certain joy in finding like a special weapon and being like, holy crap, what is this? So I'm going to give you one of the weapons that everybody is going to find, not really early on, but like after you complete the first world, give or take. It's a cube gun. So how does this cube gun work? So the weapon system works, you have something that's called a long gun, which is usually the weapon that has the most ammunition. It's like your main weapon. Then you have a handgun, and the handgun does not necessarily just mean like a revolver type thing. It can be anything, can be like a submachine gun or whatever. But the handgun is kind of like your alternate weapon. In some builds, it might be your main. Usually, you know, in the most common situations, you would consider long guns your main gun, handguns your second gun, and then you have a melee weapon, right? And so this gun, this cube gun, is a handgun. And the way that it works is it has infinite ammo, but it only has 5 projectiles. So it'll shoot these projectiles at the enemies and then come back into the gun so that you can shoot it again. So if you shoot at something that's very far away, that means that it's going to take the projectiles longer to come back. If you shoot at something that's really close, that means you can basically shoot machine gun style at it and the projectiles keep coming back. Naturally, there's going to be an overheat mechanic to ensure that you don't just like close up on enemies like with infinite ammunition, because that wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? But, you know, so this cube gun is really interesting because, you know, it has this weird mechanic with the 5 projectiles and infinite ammunition, but then it has this special mod that you have which we'll talk more about what mods are, but it has this special mod that generates a shield around you, and then you can throw the shield, and it's basically like this cube that is dealing damage as it goes through the scenery. And, you know, this is just a really creative weapon. I thought it was amazing when I first found it. There's another one, for instance, which is an assault rifle that I got from one of the main bosses. I call it the rat gun, and it just shoots these red projectiles that cause bleeding. I found a grenade launcher that was actually a friend of mine helped me with like an event, and, you know, I got there and grenade launcher, basically just super basic ass grenade launcher. We found another weapon that looked like a horse's, that weapon shot burning projectiles and could shoot something which is basically looked like the Big Bang. I'm not joking. You will actually see like a constellation and an explosion when you shoot this weapon. And this is some of the more vanilla stuff. Well, I guess the Big Bang weapon is not as vanilla, but some of the other stuff that I talked about is some of the more vanilla weapons that you'll find in the game. So really interesting weapons in the game. Also interesting melee weapons. Like I use an axe that you can throw and it like zaps monsters with shock damage, which then generates a secondary AoE explosion. So, you know, there's just tons and tons of weapons. These are just super, super fun to find. Because, like, you know how sometimes you're playing looter games and you find a weapon and you're like, oh, this one does 1% more damage. How interesting. In this game, that rarely, if ever, actually happens. You'll find a gun. It might not be a gun that you're interested in, mind you, right? Because, you know, like in my case, if I happen to find a really cool sniper rifle, I'm like, I don't give a damn. I don't like sniper rifles. I don't care. But the sniper rifle is probably going to be a lot more interesting. You know, what it can do, it'll be a lot more interesting than just, oh, this thing does 5% more damage, right? So I really like that. It makes every single time that you encounter something new in the game feel meaningful. Even if it's not a weapon, maybe you'll find a ring. Every single ring that you find in this game, which you can equip 4 rings, is going to have a meaningful impact in your build, because you can get like a ring that gives you 5% lifesteal on summons, which is something that I've been using ever since I found, because the dog just lifesteals for me on top of regenerating my health, which makes the dog like super cool to hang out with me, right? And then, you know, you have another one where the amount of regeneration that you have will actually get, the amount of health regeneration you have will get converted into mod power, which charges up these powers that we talked about that the guns have, charges them up faster. So there are all of these things that you can do to formulate your build, coupled together with the guns, the mods, the mutators. So another thing. Mods. You might have a regular gun instead of a boss type gun. That means it's going to have a slot where you can put a mod that will do whatever the hell you want. To give an idea, one of the basic mods, for instance, will straight up generate a flaming tornado, which will pull enemies towards it and inflict them with burning damage. Another mob will summon actual space crabs, which will jump onto the enemies and explode. Yeah. There's completely insane mods. Like a friend of mine showed me another mod which I already had access to since almost the beginning of the game, because it was one of the first bosses that I did. Well, it was in the second world that I did, but it was like a boss that I fought fairly early on, and I didn't test this mod because it didn't seem interesting. A friend of mine just bought the mod and he was testing it out, and I was like, what? It's just like this big ball of electricity that you shoot from your gun, and you can put this on any like standard gun, any gun that's not like a boss gun. Like, think of it, for instance, you know how when you go to a merchant in Dark Souls and you'll just buy like a basic axe, right? That axe, you're going to be able to customize and transform it into a fire axe, a lightning axe, whatever. That's kind of like the power of these more basic weapons. You can put mods on them that change the stuff that they do. Whereas if you get a boss weapon, it's going to have a pre-built mod on it. Like the Big Bang is considered like a special weapon, so the Big Bang explosion is like this big boss mod type of thing. But with a basic weapon, you can customize. So my friend was showing me that you would put this thing on the gun, you would shoot it, and just like this big ball of electricity that would go through the enemies and continuously zap them. And it would last for ridiculously long. I was looking at this like, that thing's still going? What the hell is going on? So, you know, there's just a lot of stuff for you to experiment with. And if that doesn't, you know, explain to you how crazy the loot system is in the game, I don't know what will. It's just really fun every single time. It's one of those games where every single time you pick up a piece of loot, you're actually going into your inventory because you know it's going to be meaningful. You're going to be like, oh, let me make sure that this is something that I could potentially use. A lot of times it's not going to be for your build, but it is going to be a meaningful mod nonetheless for potentially another build. And that is the cool thing, right? Whereas a lot of times, you know, you'll pick up a bunch of trash in a lot of games that have like loot. You pick just a bunch of trash and you're like, what do I care about any of this? This is garbage. This game doesn't really do that, which is good. Respect your time, and I cannot say how important that is nowadays. Another thing that you can put on guns are mutators as well, and mutators is a more passive effect, so to give you an idea, one of the best mutators that we found in the game so far, at least for me, is called the Bandit mutator. What does that do? Every time you shoot a bullet, there's a chance you don't actually consume the ammunition. And, you know, if you level that up all the way, it also increases the fire rate of your weapon. So sometimes, like if there's this machine gun in the game that just has 80 bullets, I would go into a room with this mod and I just start blasting. The gun wouldn't run out of ammo. So, you know, there's stuff like that. There's also mods that will increase your... There's also mutators which would increase your mod power generation so that you can use the gun special stuff even faster. It's just really, really good. Like, really, really good. Really, really well done. So now let's talk about, I guess, some of the, you know, in terms of the gameplay, it's third-person shooter, feels satisfying, pulling a trigger, doing all that stuff. Boss fights are overall pretty good. I do have some complaints when it comes to boss fights because certain bosses were clearly not made with certain classes in mind. So there are going to be winners and losers depending on the boss that you're fighting. And that is really unfortunate. Because, you know, you might jump into a boss with a winning combination that you've been completely destroying the game with, and the boss will just take a crap all over your class, and you're going to get the sense that it's like, well, that doesn't really feel fair because there's nothing my class can really do about this boss, and that's never a good feeling, and I hope that the team can do something to mitigate that, maybe tweak some of the classes around, I don't know. Because I understand that there should be fights where, oh, this class is stronger in this fight, this class is stronger in that fight. But in my opinion, that should never be a fight where it's like, oh no, this particular fight completely negates the mechanic of this class. An example, there was a boss that I fought called the Bloat King. Now, the Bloat King is this little friggin' blob that is in the ceiling, and he's just like zapping you from distance, right? And he's in the ceiling. So you're fighting, you're in an arena, it's a tight arena, you have to pay attention where you put your feet because you can fall down. If you fall down, there's like a bunch of minions there to make your life a living hell, and then you have to crawl back up so that you can fight the boss, right? And, you know, I'm playing the Handler, which is a class that has a dog. And so what happens is my dog is just sitting there because he can't actually do anything. He can't attack the boss is in the ceiling. But not only that, it was actually worse than that because the dog would see the minions in the ground and he'd be like, aha! I must attack the minions, and he would jump to the ground and get himself killed. And I was like, oh great, now I can't even use the dog ability to kind of like revive myself or to heal myself or to boost my attack or boost my defenses because the dog just suicides into the minions every time we start the fight. I believe that since then they've actually improved that because I've provided feedback to the team. I was like, hey guys, you know, this Bloat King fight with the Handler is an actual nightmare. This is nightmare fuel. I don't know what to tell you about that. But I don't know if maybe their intention is that you just swap classes for those fights. I guess that's something that you can do, but it doesn't feel good because I always like having like, no, this is my main class. I want to play this class, and you know, and you can swap it around and whatnot, and I'll swap around the secondary, but I've always considered Handler's my main class. I like the Handler. Handler's fun. And you get to some of those bosses and you're like, oh, wow, this is not good. Another boss fight, which I'm not going to get into spoiler territory, but just going to give, I guess, a little bit of a feedback for the team if they end up watching this review, is the final boss fight. So the final boss fight suffers from the same problems that I was talking about, where if you're a handler, your dog is just sitting around and is like, well, you know, at least he's not suiciding into a bunch of minions, but he will just like sit there and do nothing even when he could be attacking the boss because he can't, I don't know, the AI can't calculate when the boss is attackable by him. And then on top of it, there's just like a phase of this fight where they just, it's so much information overload that it seemed to me like the only feasible way to get through it is just, I'm just going to get super strong and tank all these hits because I can't read what the hell is happening on the screen. Maybe I'm too old. I'm 41 years old now. Maybe I'm just too old for this, but like I could not read what was happening on the screen because there's glitching effects happening and there's just like a bunch of red at any given time, and the boss will just throw a zillion things at you at the same, and I'm just like, bro, what's going on? What is happening? I don't understand. And, you know, I've spent a couple of hours in that fight, so it's like, you know, usually after you spend a couple of hours in a fight, they'll be like, okay, I can understand this move. I know what he's doing here. I know what he's doing there. And I can identify some of the things, but it just gets so confusing and overwhelming that I felt like maybe I'm just too old. That might be the case. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the final boss fight of the game. Let's just leave that at that. But I know that a lot of people really liked it. So there is that. So, you know, maybe it's me. I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyway, I wanted to jump into... I know that this review is already super long, but it's like, see, this is why I was hesitant, because I'm so excited to talk about it. But I definitely need to talk about the procedural generation of this game, which is potentially like some of the best that I've seen in the industry, and it's not even close, right? So when it comes to procedural generation, you'll have a game like No Man's Sky, which is really good. Don't get me wrong, I love No Man's Sky. You guys know I've even done a couple of videos. Not recently, but a couple of months ago about No Man's Sky because I got addicted to it for a brief period there. And I think No Man's Sky does a fantastic job with procedural generation now. But the procedural generation that they do in this game is really cool because it gives you access to completely different stories. So say, for instance, if I start playing the game right now and you start playing the game right now next to me, it is... The probabilities of us encountering anything that is even remotely similar are so astronomical that I would actually be surprised if it would happen. I would be super surprised if it would happen. Like two people starting the game at the exact same time, getting the exact same outcome would be insane. So the way that it works is whenever you start the game, you know, the game generates a seed, right? And that is going to generate 3 worlds that you're going to go into. Now, those 3 worlds can be in any order. So you can start I guess I'll give you the themes of some of them. So there's like a forest type world. There's a, there's like a, what do I call Losum? There's like the Yarnum world, I guess, if you've played Bloodborne. So there's this forest type world, there's a Yarnum world, and then there's this space world, kind of like sci-fi world that you can go to. And for starters, when you generate a new run, you can start on any one of those worlds. But then each of those worlds has 2 different main story threads that you will have to follow. So even if you start in the same world that I do, there's a chance that you'll start on a different thread. And then the actual map sections that you navigate are going to have different themes to them, and they're going to have different events that can happen in each of them. And when you're talking about events, you're talking about events that you need to do in order to progress. They're going to have different secrets implemented in them that are going to give you access to different loot. The loot is not necessarily random. It is going to, I think that some of the loot might be random, but a lot of the loot will actually be associated with a specific event in a specific dungeon or a specific puzzle or something like that. And there's just so much of this content in the game that in order, if you're someone who wants to do the completionist thing, you're going to be spending hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of hours. Like I remember, Tragic, I don't know if it was Tragic who said it, but somebody was saying that some of the QA team of this game had played the game for over 400 hours and they hadn't seen everything, they hadn't unlocked everything, and they haven't discovered every single secret. 400 hours, okay? I would like to remind you that the price of this game on the standard edition is $50. Okay? 400 hours, and you're not going to see everything. Now, there are systems in place to help with this procedural generation. So say, for instance, you're looking for an event that can only spawn on the forest world. There's a thing called adventure mode, which will let you continuously generate the forest world after you've completed it once. It will let you continuously generate that world until it has the combination of things that you want to go get the loot piece that you could potentially be looking for, or to just, explore more snares, explore more things. And now here's another aspect to this. So on top of each world having 2 different stories which culminate in you fighting 2 different bosses for each of those worlds, there are also different ways of killing the final boss of those worlds. And depending on the, sometimes it's a dialogue choice. Sometimes it's something that you need to explore the world in order to get like an item or something that gives you access to another thing. Sometimes it's killing the boss in a specific way that is going, and I'm sorry about the train noise, that is going to guarantee that you kill it in a way that you can get a different piece of loot. Because each of these different ways to kill these bosses is going to give you a different piece of loot. So, for instance, to give you an idea, in this forest location, with the first bit of story, the first story thread that I've ever gotten, if you kill the final boss in one way, you're going to get the gun that I was talking about, the rat gun. If you kill it in a different way, you're going to get a melee weapon that's a staff that does healing. So it actually affects the loot that you get depending on the way in which you kill the boss. And it's really cool because there's all of these secrets and these dungeons and these puzzles that just have this super old school feel to it. So to give you an idea, there was this puzzle that I found which involved shadows and levers and all of these different things. And when I was in my stream, I just spent like an hour trying to figure out that puzzle. And it was great because when you actually figure it out, you're like, yeah, figured it out. There's also going to be puzzles that you're never going to figure out. Like there's even a class where they hid a class in the game that could only be accessed by data miners. Which, to be honest, I kind of feel like they might have taken it a little bit too far there. But, they did that. And then there's like this whole event that you go into to find this class and to equip this class. And it's not like it's more powerful than any of the other classes. It's just like a hidden class that, you can look that stuff up now because people have figured out how to do it and whatnot. And I've already unlocked the class. I would have never ever figured out the thing, because like the specific stuff that they expect you to do is absolutely insane. But yeah, the game's a ton of fun. I don't really have a whole lot more to say. I just wanted to really get deep into the nitty gritty of all of the different systems that the game has, and I still feel like I haven't even addressed all of them. But fundamentally, if you take into account all of the technical stuff that I've mentioned at the start of this stream, and you're willing to potentially take a chance on that, I think that if the game runs good for you, this is a unique experience, and this is something that I cannot recommend enough. This is the type of game that we need to be supporting. This is the type of game that I want to see more of. Like, I bought the Ultimate Edition of this game because it gave me early access to stream and do all of these things. But if it wasn't, after what I've experienced of the game, I would have upgraded to the Ultimate Edition anyway. It was really, really good. I'm having a fantastic time with the game. Cannot recommend it enough. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.